dressed in grey, working undercover for CIA.
All right, it's Hank, and today we're going to talk about the global currency reset and a couple of different ways that I could see it potentially going. Could be good news, could be bad news. It's definitely going to be a period in history where it's going to be tough, likes of which we've never seen before. And in a later video, I'll make another video about the Second Great Depression, what it's probably going to look like. You guys know I love my coffee here, and I like to spill it too. All right. In game for the petrodollar. If you saw my last video, you'd know. You'd know that we talked about the end game as far as the petrodollar being over and why it's over geostrategically with all the other moves that all the other countries have made. Boxing in the U.S. So what's the possibilities, probabilities, and the players in this future currency, whatever it might be? Well, there's a couple of things already going on. One is this PetroYuan they've got going on. It's a Chinese international exchange note where the Chinese are trying to take the role of where the U.S., supplant the U.S. as the bankers of the world. And so they've set up it is a bank where people can settle their trade accounts in yuan. So they can basically use the Chinese yuan and buy oil with it. They can convert their local currency into yuan, and then with the yuan they can buy oil with it. And so far it seems to be working all right for them. Some countries have accepted it. It's still kind of in the early stages of getting done, but it's a possibility for the future. Frankly, I wouldn't trust it, but there it is. What the plan was. Let's talk about what I think the plan was, or I'm going to speculate here with some good reasoning, though, behind it. There was a plan for the New World Order. Everybody knows about the plan for the New World Order, which is essentially global fascism. Basically, a neo-feudal, a new lords and ladies and kings and everybody else is a serf kind of deal. So for a long time, they knew that this fiat system was going to break down. They knew it had a lifespan. And in fact, they actually hastened its demise with all of the bad decisions that they made. Were they really that bad? Can we attribute it to ignorance, or can we attribute it to a plan? Can we attribute it to malice? That's the real question. I believe that as smart as those people are, and the way they plan everything, that it was not ignorance, it was a plan. Although I do think that they did expect to hold on to the oil and control the oil, and that they have failed to do. The East, meaning China and Russia, especially Russia, has thrown a big monkey wrench into their plans. Yeltsin was a puppet, Gorbachev was a puppet, and they thought probably Putin would be a puppet of this new world order. And the Russians actually ended up being quite a bit of a thorn in their side for the international banks. The Russians nationalized their bank and took control of it. They still allowed the central bank to be there, but it went under Russian government control. I think it kind of surprised them when Russians, out of basically the intelligence arm of the Russian Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, or the FSB, kind of a lineage of the KGB, came out as the FSB, and Putin was a part of that game, and it might have surprised him. Their intelligence network, and by they, I'm talking about probably Fascist International, going all the way back to a guy named Reinhard Gehlen, who was running an intelligence network inside of Russia. He was the Nazi. He was the German Nazi that ran the intelligence network inside of Russia that ended up getting incorporated into the CIA later on. So it may have actually escaped their notice with the FSB popping out on the other side of the KGB's intelligence arm gathering. But that's all speculation, because, you know, who really knows? Nobody, except for the real players. So they're going to bring in this one world currency after the whole globe is all connected. They collapse the whole thing, and in steps the IMF with their SDR. Okay, so the International Monetary Fund pops out with the SDR, which is special drawing rights. And it goes like this: the planned global collapse, all the credit markets freeze, just like they did in 2007, 2008. So that means there's no revolving credit. All your just-in-time delivery services fail. Truckers can't put fuel in. Basically, most business is resolved through having a credit instrument. So think of it as kind of the lubrication, the grease that makes the machinery of the economy move. Without liquidity, without the ability to move around money and have credit available that's paid off, accounts payable, accounts receivable, without that credit to come into a business to buy goods, and then the goods are sold, and then the money is collected, and then the credit is paid, and it moves like that, because rarely is a business ever so capitalized that they don't need credit in order to function. That's very rare. So all the credit markets freeze during this planned collapse, and that causes a lot of citizen hardship all over the world. So in steps the White Knight, the IMF. We're going to bring back liquidity to everything by putting out this tremendous loan to the world's governments. So everybody gets a loan. Everybody's got money to spend now. But now it's under the one world currency, the SDR, or the special drawing rights, which really is a basket of currencies that are all tied together, pegged together. Again, it's moving from one fiat system into another fiat system. And this time, you're not answerable to a nation. You're answerable to this world government. So if you have a gripe, who do you go to? Right now it's impossible to get your grievances addressed when it comes to the way that governments manage money, even with private central banking. Imagine private central banking on steroids. That's what this SDR is all about. So there you are. No oversight. Where's your governmental oversight? It's an extra governmental organization. The IMF is known to be corrupt. It's basically what they do is they put out this loan to a lot of different countries, whether it be in Africa or Greece or whatever have you. And if they don't pay, the IMF comes in and they take the natural resources, or they'll take the art, or they'll seize property, or whatever. They'll impose austerity measures, whatever they can do to squeeze the people because they want their money. Okay, that's probably why they want to establish a EU army. They need to have their own military arm, and I don't think the United States is going to be wanting to do that anymore, because everything, when it boils down to it, has to be backed up with force. Okay. So there's a history of geopolitical manipulation with the IMF. So I don't think it's going to go that way. I don't think it's going to go that way. You can, Amschel Rothschild had a saying, you know, if you control the money, I care not who makes the laws. So now, there's been a lot of discussion about going to a gold-backed trade note. Okay, that's why all these countries have been hoarding gold. 1, 2, and 3 are the same as above. Planned global collapse, frozen credit markets, citizen hardships. There's actually a little bit of literature out there, and I'm hesitant to mention the title because it's the protocols, and you probably should know what I'm talking about here. It's a bit racist, just to say the least, and it's got a little bit of disinformation in it in the way that certain groups are referenced. But from the very beginning, it was written by a Russian. From the very beginning, the way that he perceived this plan to go all the way out would be to bring in a fiat system and then go back to a gold system. And then that way, during the years when the fiat was working, they could accumulate this gold privately. And then it would be one of the largest wealth transfers in human history. So I don't know if that's still the plan. Okay, I don't know if that was a ruse and this is not, or I don't know how it's going to play. Could be either one. So let's assume for a second that they do have a gold-backed trade note here in the United States. Let's say they nationalize the Federal Reserve. So now the private central bank is owned by the United States government. Now, the propaganda out there right now is that it would be wonderful to have a national bank because you wouldn't have a private central bank earning any interest off of it and all this different type of stuff. There wouldn't be creating fiat money out of air. There would be gold accounts to settle it. Could be true, maybe not. It could go two different ways. You could have something like a U.S. national dollar that's unsecured, which is like a local currency. So it would be akin to the peso, basically. You would have a dollar that's like the peso, where it buys domestic goods cheaply and can only be used inside of the United States. And it's issued by the U.S. government, not necessarily backed by gold. Doesn't have to be. Who says it has to be? Okay? If the United States government makes it that is the only currency that the people can use, and they back it up with force, what can you do about it? You can't do anything about it. That's the thing. Okay? So those local trade notes, you buy things like, your domestic beer, whatever is produced locally, and the cost is down. The Chinese have already been doing something like this with the RMB or the renminbi. So in China, you can buy domestic beer and domestic food and everything that they produce fairly cheaply with the RMB, and they don't have to settle anything internationally, so it doesn't have to be backed by gold or anything. It's all domestic. Then there would be an international gold trade note. Now, it's anybody's guess as to whether or not the United States has the gold. Now, I've heard that the Clintons and Bush cabal had taken all the money out of Fort Knox, or all the gold out of Fort Knox, and replaced it with gold-plated tungsten bars, okay, which ended up in a lot of different banks around the world. It ended up in Canadian banks. They found these things. They found a lot of them in China. The Chinese were very pissed about it. They sold them bad gold. I mean, gosh, you really can't put it past those people for anything. You're talking about super criminal here. If it's criminal and it could be done, they probably did it. They probably did it. I mean, I can't even think of a a super villain, like a comic book super villain that's that criminal, quite frankly. And it's not really a laughing matter. It's just so absurd, the level of criminality that they went down. The road they went down is just, it's amazing. It's beyond belief. So, also I spoke about history's hidden gold heists, about 9/11 too, about that gold that was in the basement of the Twin Towers. You see the Brinks armored truck pulling away. Everybody is fleeing Manhattan, and there's this Brinks truck just heading out. So, where did all that gold go? Nobody knows. It could be, did the U.S. government reclaim it? Is it a third party out there that has it? Is it an international party that has it? Is it a criminal organization that has it? I don't know. Now, if you look at the official statistics, we have about 8,000 tons of gold. Now, official statistics don't mean anything anymore. You just can't trust them. They don't let anybody in to Fort Knox to assay these things. And of course the trade towers, they went down, so where's the gold? Okay. That could be an issue. If we have the gold, we can resolve our international trade with that gold backed note, because other countries can come in, they can physically assay the gold so they can measure it and everything. They know it's there, and that way we can settle our trades without having to move that gold. If you have something like a trade deficit, that's why it's so important right now, and I think part of Donald Trump's strategy is, or President Trump's strategy is, to reduce all of these trade deficits, because if you enter a gold-backed system and you have any sort of trade deficits at all, your gold is going to be flying out of the country, and soon you'll have nothing. So it's very, very important to have a trade surplus. And here in the United States, we produce a lot of food. We're no longer the breadbasket of the world. The Russians actually overtook us in that, because we started doing crazy things like using GMOs, and nobody wanted it. So that might be an issue. California is having a lot of problems with drought. Fukushima, nobody wants wine from Napa Valley. It's tainted with cesium. California is a big breadbasket. Midwest has got a lot of wheat. Florida, fruits and vegetables. Seafood. So what happens if there is no gold to settle these disputes with, or these trades with? Then you have to use something like food, because we need, say, rubber, or we need tires, or we need some kind of other finished product from another country that we can't produce here ourselves. And so you would settle that with food. And what could that potentially mean? It would mean serious food shortages. So if we have the gold, it might be okay. If we don't have the gold, it could be serious trouble. And we just don't know. All right, so what happens when they nationalize the private bank? Okay, they seize the private bank's assets. All right. Now, Ron Paul's been going on for years and years and years in the Fed, in the Fed, in the Fed. And I asked the folks over there at the Federal Reserve, why don't you let the government in to audit the Fed? Well, if they want to see it so bad, why don't you just show them the books? And they say, no, we can't do that, because if we did that, then it would basically show that we're colluding with the government, or that the government potentially is influencing the bank's operations, which from the banking perspective, it's a no-no. But they nationalize the bank. The government comes in and seizes all the bank assets. Now, what could that potentially mean? It could mean that there's going to be a debt jubilee, And this is the rosiest of all scenarios, where all your student loan debt is discharged, all your onerous debt is discharged, your credit card debt is discharged, your mortgage debt, you know, who knows? I don't think that's going to be discharged. Okay, so best case scenario, they discharge credit card and student debt, stuff like that. I don't think that that's going to happen. It could, but I don't think so. And forgive me for not having a whole lot of trust left in government institutions anymore, given what we've seen over the past few years, or basically my lifetime, going all the way back to 9/11. I mean, I was in high school when that happened, and it definitely has affected the way I perceive the world. So what's more likely to happen? There would be a revaluation of debt. So what does that mean? It means that everything right now is so out of whack, there's no price discovery. The petrodollar ends, the inflation comes back home. There's a hyperinflationary period where all those Federal Reserve notes become quickly worthless. You couldn't even buy a bag of rice for it. Everybody loses their 401k, they lose their retirement, all the pensions go bust. Anything that you have in paper, all your paper contracts go bust. Your insurance contracts, all that stuff is gone, basically, because it won't keep pace with hyperinflation. All that inflation that we've exported to the world, once we can't enforce the petrodollar anymore, it comes home, and it's game over. So the revaluation debt. Now for credit cards, basically you could probably settle those accounts for, you know, I hate to say pennies on the dollar or anything like that, but as you enter a hyperinflationary period, it also devalues your debt. So relative to what the inflation is, the debt seems small in comparison, and that's the way that you pay them back. But see, the problem is a lot of people won't have jobs to be able to keep pace with that hyperinflation. Just because goods and services and all that other stuff inflate does not necessarily mean your wages are going to inflate either. And if, you know, your Social Security and stuff is not paying anymore or anything like that relative to what you need, big trouble. Credit cards, still I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work, if it's going to get revalued or discharged. Student debt. This is one that I'm very concerned about, because not that long ago, Obama passed a law where student debt could not be discharged. So you can't claim bankruptcy or anything on that. You cannot get your student debt off the books. So say you've got 100 grand or more in student debt, and that gets revalued into the new system. Basically, you have X amount of months, and some have said 9 months, let's call it 9 months, to pay the entirety of that debt before that debt is revalued in the U.S. trade note, or the gold-backed note if it goes that way, or the fiat-backed local dollar. Okay, so that debt cannot be discharged. So as it becomes difficult in the future to have a job or, you know, save or anything like that, you now owe the government that debt, okay? Because they've seized the assets of the private bank. So now you owe the government, just the same as if you owed taxes, okay? And you've seen what the IRS does to people, all right? You know, that's cause for concern. Again, another thing that concerns me is mortgages. If people have taken out mortgages at the top of the market where we stand right now, as I've seen a lot of people that are about my age and younger have done, they will have 9 months to pay off the entirety of that mortgage as their jobs are getting wiped out. If you're in retail, kiss it goodbye. If you're in real estate sales, you're screwed. If you're, I mean, there's going to be very few professions that are not, or there are going to be very few professions that are immune to this. So as people are having to deal with hyperinflation, they're also going to have to try and pay their mortgage off, the entirety of their mortgage, before that debt is revalued into the gold or whatever system that the national bank does. Okay, so now your state and your local and your federal entities now can foreclose on your property. They own it, okay, because they've taken the assets of the private bank. All right, so if you don't have the gold to pay it off, or enough of the new trade notes, you owe it to the government. You got to work that off. Okay. So I don't think you're going to get away from whatever mortgage debt that you have, and at the same time, you'd still have to pay your property taxes. So any of these things can, basically, the government can come and seize your property, and that could be how they decide to collateralize whatever they're doing and moving forward with their national bank. Okay, so you really, really hope that we have some good leadership that's going to make the right decisions, because it can go a lot of different ways, and not all of them would be very comfortable. So property taxes, you're dealing with foreclosures and the mortgages, and properties on fire sale, because people can't afford to pay the property taxes. They can't even afford to buy food. So if you have the gold, then you're good. If you don't have any debt, and you've got stellar credit, and you're one of those few people that can retain a job, you're going to be in a very good position. Everybody else, not so much. So fire sale on property. All right. Now, I've already talked about the U.S. National Bank being secured, as in being gold-backed to settle the accounts. Sound money is the best money. Hopefully this is a policy they go to, and hopefully they have the gold. Now, it could turn out really, really good insofar as if it's gold-backed, we don't have to deal with the inflation, and you can actually save money and retire, basically. The purchasing power of your dollar won't evaporate, but it's going to take a long time. We could be looking at a decade or more of Great Depression, Part 2, and I mean serious, hardcore Great Depression. And then unsecured, what's to prevent the U.S. National Bank from being unsecured? There's absolutely nothing that would prevent them from being unsecured. If they want to continue to spend like drunken sailors, they can do that. If they decide not to back it by gold with the local currency. Now, if it is gold backed, they could do repatriation through entitlements, and that would mean that your elderly would get Social Security payments in this gold backed trade note, so they can afford to live and buy food and all that other stuff. And that's a great way to kind of get liquidity back into the system and get things moving in the country once again. That would be, I think, a wise decision. It's possible that we have good leadership, and that would be the wise decision, and that would be a good way to repatriate and recapitalize the economy. Also, infrastructure projects, a lot of other different things you can do to repatriate the economy and get the financial machinery moving again. There's nothing that prevents the U.S. National Bank from loaning money to people at interest, okay? I don't know where all these people are talking about how it's going to be interest-free, debt-free money. I have no idea why they're saying that. Why is the U.S. government going to take the risk to loan you money without having interest? Now, initially, what was done way, way back in the day is they would print currency, or they would create money, because it would actually be money if it was backed by the U.S. government. They would use it to fund their projects, and it would go out into the communities, and then they would collect it back in taxes. They wouldn't need interest. It would be taxes and not interest. So you get taxed as much as the government needs. That's kind of scary too in this day and age, all right, with the way a lot of people are thinking. You're really going to notice that. And they could loan it at interest. There's no rule that says they can't. But then again, it could be interest-free. All right. And then they would just collect it back in taxes. I very seriously doubt it will be interest-free, though. And so what happens when you have government control of your debts? Okay, what happens if you owe the IRS money? The IRS is not even really a government agency. They are part of the Federal Reserve machinery. Okay, they want to make sure that the government gets paid its taxes. Now, the government is not taking in tax revenue at all what it needs to operate the way that it operates. There's no part of the accounting that makes sense right now at all. It hasn't for a long time. So what happens when the U.S. government legitimately owns all the debt out there? My suggestion to you would be pay cash for everything. Don't borrow a dime unless you know you can pay it off. And I am so serious about that. I am serious as a heart attack, because what's to say they don't bring back debtors' prisons? I mean, we already kind of have them anyway. You know, judges are doing that kind of thing, throwing people in jail if, they haven't paid a court fine or something. It's happening. Could it be forced labor type camps like they do with the prison industrial complex? I mean, we got plenty of prisons. If the government is hard up for money and they need or want to produce things for the military industrial complex without paying people, what do? You put them in prison. Okay, forced labor camps. Could go that way. All right. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully we have good leadership and the foresight to restore the republic. Indentured servitude. Okay, so the government owns your debt. Indentured servitude could happen. All right, it's happened before in history. So we fought really hard in this country in the past to get rid of all these types of things that have been going on in Europe for a long time ago. So hopefully we get back to the constitutional republic. Everything is right there in the Constitution. If you read it, it's there. And then the last possibility is there's some kind of unsecured parallel financial system, which could be cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency to me is a bit bizarre. One, because our electronic systems are not secure. Two, if you lose power, what are you going to do? Three, what happens when the grocery store machine or whatever shuts down and you can't use your cryptocurrency? There's nothing physical that you're holding, so trade cannot be conducted unless the electronics are working properly. They say that they only create a certain or a finite amount of cryptocurrency, but it's infinitely divisible. So tell me again how that makes sense. Doesn't really. Now, it's kind of a convenient method of exchange, and there are some possibilities there, but again, for me, I have very little trust to put my fate in somebody else's hands. And cryptocurrency is one of those things where it's outside of your control. So, and from my perspective, if you're young and you haven't taken on a lot of debt, you've got your working life to save, and you're probably going to be all right. If you're already in a mountain of debt and they don't do things like debt jubilee, it could be trouble for you. If you're elderly and they don't do repatriation through Social Security, that could be a real issue for you because you're going to lose your pension and all those other things. If you're almost at retirement age and you haven't put something into physical and you've got everything out there, 100% exposure in paper contracts, it could be trouble for you. I anticipate that there's probably going to be shortages of goods and things like that, but I'll get into that type of thing in another video, which will be Great Depression Part 2, and probably how that's going to play out and how to prepare for it and what to do. So there's a lot that's up in the air. There's a lot of different ways that it can go. It can go, we could enter a golden age, pardon the pun, almost a renaissance. They could release some of these suppressed technologies, or we could go down a very dark path to a totalitarian type of future. So, you know, we do everything that we can right now to make sure that our republic thrives. And I believe that the United States has a vested interest in creating, going back to the Constitution, you know, and the fundamentals that are there. You know, the answers are in the past. You know, there's nothing new under the sun. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just go with what works. When it comes to government and all that stuff, frankly, I don't know what the right answers are. There's a lot of good arguments for a lot of different things, and I don't know. I simply admit that I do not know. But one thing I do know is I'm going to do whatever I can to take care of myself and my family. Self-reliance in any system is going to be the best defense. Awareness and self-reliance. It's been Hank. Catch you on the flip side.